97.3 ESPN Eagles insider joins us now to talk a little Birds and Lions. And boy, that game with the snow against the Lions still in our memories, John.
Yeah, and we have extremes, evidently, Pete, because it's 8 inches of snow versus 90 degrees in late September. So I don't know what you'd rather have.
Well, I'll take the 90 degrees. You can hydrate, although the players really loved that game, right? That snow game, that still sticks out, and fans still talk about that, how much fun they had.
Yeah, I think it's always memorable, those types of games. Just that visual in the history of football, snow games, I think everyone kind of likes. But from the players' perspective, yeah, neither is great. You'd prefer to have a dome and a fast track, but I think they would rather have snow than 90 degrees, because 90 degrees you're going to see, especially this time of year, because people aren't used to it.
Right.
You're going to see cramping, and you're going to see some difficulty to try to get through that game from a conditioning standpoint.
Yeah, 6 years later, the pictures and stories still resonate. I forgot that Kerry Williams, first of all, I forgot about Kerry Williams, period. But then I forgot it was Kerry Williams who said, hey, guys, maybe we should change our cleats. And boom, second half explosion.
Well, see, he knows about sconces and cleats. How could you forget about Kerry Williams?
That's right. Weren't sconces the furniture dressing or the window dressing or something?
Yeah.
Didn't I have to look up? Yeah, John McMullen Hunter said sconces when we were talking to him. I'm thinking, what the heck is a sconce?
Yeah, well, I like Kerry, because Kerry was one of those guys who was very, very honest during the Chip Kelly era and about some of the impact going 100 miles an hour had on veteran players when you only have 53 on the roster and 46 on game day.
Well, John McMullen's with us talking Eagles-Lions, and Deshaun Jackson already ruled out, and that's my Twitter question of the day of, with all the Eagles injuries, what's the level of concern about their game against the Lions? So I know that, you're the neutral guy. You don't have a level of concern, but how much do you think the injuries will affect this week's game? We certainly saw it have an effect in Atlanta.
Oh, a lot. If this team is completely healthy and they have all their skill position players, I don't think this is a game of much concern, to be honest, other than it's the NFL. And even though this year there's probably less parity than a very long time, the Lions are one of those teams. They're not a good team, but they're not a bad team. So that is the perfect example of somebody who could jump up and bite you in this league. But again, from a health standpoint, if the Eagles are 100%, I think you put this one in your back pocket and you're pretty confident with it. The fact that there are so many issues, and even though the Eagles are playing the competitive advantage card with Alshon Jeffrey and Dallas Goedert with a game on Thursday, I think it's more likely they're going to sit than not. So that makes it more problematic. And there is a little bit more concern. But the Eagles have been dominant at Lincoln Financial Field. The Lions are one of those teams, second-year head coach. They're getting a little bit better. But I always talk about skipping steps and people wanting to skip steps. You got to kind of learn how to win on the road in this league, especially in tough environments, and that's what Philadelphia has been and is.
Well, at the very least, John, whether Dallas Goedert can go or not, at least they've brought up Hicks back from Alex Ellis, excuse me. I keep calling him Hicks for some reason. I don't know why I have that in my brain. Alex Ellis to come back. So, they really handicapped or handcuffed themselves last week. Once Dallas couldn't go, throw out the 12 personnel packages and all those plays.
Well, yeah, I kind of talked about that this week a little bit. A little bit of that is overrated. And I talked with Doug specifically about that back on cutdown day, because the Eagles only kept two tight ends, and everybody was like, well, what are you doing? You want to play a lot of 12 personnel? And Doug explained, look, yeah, we want to play 12 personnel because Zach and Dallas are really good. But if we don't have one of them, then we're going to play 11 because our backup receivers are better than our backup tight ends. And that's what Doug likes anyway. So that's where they are. So in essence, they're saying J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, McCown are better than Alex Ellis. So if that were to happen and an injury occurred, which it has, they would go to more 11 personnel anyway. So, and I think from even a larger perspective, people get hung up on labels and really different formations, different personnel groupings. You're running the same plays, giving the defense a different look with different types of players, but it's not as different as people think.
We're talking with John McMullen, Eagles-Lions tomorrow at Lincoln Financial Field. Now, John, I know that Sal Powell was on with Mike Gill yesterday, and what I did not know is that Carson Wentz is tied for third of getting hit the most. The quarterback hit the most. He's tied with Deshaun Watson, and a lot of that has to do not just that the teams are blitzing, because they're actually not blitzing as much. It's just that the O-line is not holding up. And you write, I mean, Isaac Seumalo, he was bad. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He was bad against Atlanta. And a couple of years ago, when he was bad, they stuck Wiz in. Wiz is no longer here. So how do they fix the Isaac Seumalo problem? Or is there a problem?
Not yet. And that's kind of how Doug described it. And he had a bad game. Everybody acknowledges it. The Eagles acknowledge it behind the scenes. Certainly Isaac acknowledged it in front of the scenes. So everybody knows it. But a couple things you throw into that equation. Grady Jarrett is really, really good. We talked about that. Nobody believed, evidently. So now they know. He's right there with, you talk about defensive tackles. Aaron Donald sits by himself. Then it's Fletcher Cox, Grady Jarrett, Akeem Hicks, players like that. That's how good he is. So that's number one. You're not going to face him every week. So things are going to get better from that perspective. And you expect him to play better. I mean, that was his worst game since week 2 of 2017. And now he's a veteran player. He's established himself a little bit more. Everybody has bad games. You got to bounce back, and the Eagles expect him to bounce back. So sometimes you just got to tip your cap to the other team and say, you weren't at your best. You got to learn from it. You got to turn the page. And that's where they are. Now, if it becomes repetitive, then it's an issue. So you do have to keep an eye on it. But I will say this, Pete. You mentioned the quarterback getting hit, and you mentioned those two names, not only Carson, but Deshaun Watson. Mm-hmm. Well, they get hit for a reason. And they're always trying to extend plays, and they're always trying to keep plays alive. And they're probably not willing to throw the football away to live to play another down as much as they should. The Eagles have been talking with Carson about that since day one when he arrived.
Right.
But it's his DNA as a player. So it's a tough tightrope to walk. And my point here is if the offensive line, which remains one of the top 5 in the league, if it's playing at the highest level, he's still going to be on the top of that list.
It's an excellent point from John McMullen as we're talking here on the Pete Thompson Show on 97.3 ESPN. So, John, you know, the fans clamor for the run, right? Is this going to be the game where the Eagles running game breaks out? And if so, is it Miles Sanders? Is it Jordan Howard? Is it a combination of both?
Well, it's a combination of both, but I do think we might be, at least talking to some people behind the scenes, we might be at the point where it shifts to where Jordan Howard starts being the lead back in the committee as opposed to Miles Sanders. I think the Eagles have recognized that maybe Miles is not quite ready, and Mike Rowe had mentioned at times he's running very cautiously. He's not sticking his foot in the ground and taking what's there. Doug Peterson agreed with that assessment when I asked him about it yesterday. So I do think maybe you go to the veteran presence, and I think that's where the Eagles should have been from week one. I really do, because when they are healthy, and when Deshaun's out there and Alshon is out there and Nelson's number 3 and you got the 2 great tight ends, all you need is a presence in the backfield and a guy who's going to get that 4 yards when it's there, and that will soften up the defense for the passing game. I think the Eagles have been slow to recognize that, but I think they're starting to recognize it.
Yeah, I know you were high on Jordan Howard in the offseason and in the summer and through the workouts, and then they came out, and, of course, it was such an anomaly that it was Darren Sproles that got the majority of the work, and, you know, people maybe that own Jordan Howard in fantasy or people that are just fans of the Eagles were like, wait a minute, what happened to this guy?
Yeah, I think it's more of – I think there was a little deference to Darren Sproles because of where he is in his career, week one, the opener, and Doug – likes him not only as a player but as a person. And then last week it got back to what they feel the committee should be, and that's Miles as the lead back, with Darren as the third down back and Jordan as the complement. I think they had it upside down. And I think they look at Miles and say, well, he's so explosive. If we can get him going in the right direction, to have that in our offense would put us over the top. But I think everybody's looking to hit the home run, including Miles Sanders, who's, again, instead of taking 4 yards that's there, trying to bounce it out to get 40. Sometimes you just take the single and you let the cleanup hitter hit the home run. And the cleanup hitter on the Eagles are the receivers and the tight end.
All right, John, that's on the offensive side of the ball. We'll flip over to the defensive side of the ball. And, you know, Hunter and I were talking a little bit, and I knew that Tim Jernigan, I knew that it was one of the sacks. They only have 2 sacks, and it's Tim Jernigan and Andrew Sendeo, and that's it?
Yeah, and everybody is obsessed with that number. If you look at the pressure numbers, they're actually pretty good, top half of the league. Derek Barnett, for instance, is second in the entire NFL in quarterback hits, but he hasn't gotten sacked. So people, for whatever reason, think the Eagles aren't getting a decent pass rush. I think their pass rush has been fine. I think the bigger problem has been the back end in the secondary and coverage, and it's always a combination. But until they get those numbers, until they get those sack numbers, and they tend to come in bunches, it's not really a representative stat. It's not a good stat. It's not something to hang your hat on, because the goal isn't to get a sack. The goal is to disrupt the quarterback, and whether that means getting them off the spot, beating them up, getting an incompletion, getting a quarterback hit that turns into a play, which happened with the interception that Ronald Darby made. So you have these things that people sort of don't recognize. And the best example of this is the NFC Championship game, where I think people forget, because it turned into a blowout, why it turned into a blowout.
Right.
The Vikings took the early 7-0 lead. They got the football back, and they were at a third down, and Chris Long came off the edge, and he forces the bad throw by Case Keenum that turns into the interception by Patrick Robinson. It's a pick six. The place explodes.
I remember.
You could hear the noise across the river in New Jersey. That play literally ripped the heart out of the Minnesota Vikings that day. Now, think about Chris Long. If he gets a sack, maybe the Vikings punt. They get good coverage, another 3 and out. It's a completely different ball game. And that's what I mean. Sometimes it's better to get the hurry and not the sack because of what happens on the back end.
That's very well put, John. I was in section 135, row 6, where my dad's seats are, and I, being not a member of the media that day, was adding in full throat to that throng that went bananas. And if there was a lid, would have blown the lid off of Lincoln Financial Field. Yes, it was very, very loud when Patrick Robinson had that pick six. Not just that he picked it off, but he sort of weaved his way in and out, too, and that came to our end zone. I remember it like it was yesterday. Hey, by the way, when you're talking about Derek Barnett, he's going up against a couple of left tackles that have some issues, right? The starter, Taylor Decker, is questionable, and he missed last week, and then Tyrell Crosby. I mean, these aren't exactly guys that are getting measured for their bust in Canton right now.
No, and that's been a theme. If anything, though, if you look at what Washington was going through and Atlanta, this is probably the best offensive line the Eagles have faced in the young season. Decker's supposed to play. He's a former first-round pick. Hasn't lived up to his building, but he's got some talent. And they also have Ragnow, who's the first-round pick at center, Ricky Wagner, who's a big free agent pickup a couple of years ago. So it's okay as an offensive line, but it's not great. And the Eagles are just better at home. We talked about it in week 1 during the Doug Peterson, Jim Schwartz era. No team in the NFL has given up less points per game than the Eagles at Lincoln Financial Field.
So on the receiving side of things, because we know Jackson is out, Jeffrey is questionable, there's a lot of question marks of who the downfield weapons are for Carson. 3 wide receivers certain to play, but last week it was probably a game time decision of all of a sudden Mac Hollins realized my role is going to be increased, or J.J. Arthega-Whiteside. Which of those two guys, Mac Hollins, J.J. Arthega-Whiteside, do you think is further ahead or farther ahead? You can pick the right word since you're a grammarian. And who's going to have a big game out of those two on Sunday?
Well, I don't know if either's going to have a big game. We'll see how they play. I think both, as I said, I don't think Alshon's going to play.
Okay.
And the Eagles are probably going to play the majority of 11 personnel, which means 3 receivers on the field, which you bump up Nelson Aguilar to the number 1 spot, and then it becomes Arthega-Whiteside and Mac Hollins. So both would play a lot in that scenario. And I do expect it to be a little bit better only because the Eagles have been game planning with them in mind this week, whereas they were thrown into the fire last week. And last week they spent their preparation mimicking Julio Jones on the scout team. This week they would have been mimicking Kenny Golladay if everybody was healthy. Instead, they were with the first team getting reps. So there is a difference. And you hope there's a little bit more chemistry, especially early in the game. And then sometimes talent takes over. I do know the Eagles are not going to be going at Darius Slay a whole heck of a lot. That is a cornerback that, if people don't know, that's top 10 in the game. So it's going to be the other side of the field and try to attack that way. And I think both will have their opportunities. So it kind of depends on who's playing better. But certainly, long term, Arthega-Whiteside has a far greater ceiling as a receiver than Mac Hollins.
Now, John, I can't tell a lie. During the Falcons game, when Josh McCown found himself in the ball game and started to move the offense, I cannot tell a lie. I was a little disappointed to see Carson Wentz jump up and run back in there like, heck no, because McCown was getting stuff done.
Well, I think if anything, people should recognize that Josh is still competent at 40 years old, and he's a good backup. And that's all you want. And that's why the Eagles brought him here. That's why they bent over backward to get him here. Remember, they not only gave him significant money to get him out of the broadcast booth, but he goes home every Friday to coach his son's high school football team, and then he comes back for the game. So there's a reason they did these things, and as I said, bent over backward to get him here. And that, if you do need him, he's competent. But no, I would not have been upset that Carson came back into the game. As you see how he played in the second half, although I get in the moment because things look so bad early in the first half, maybe I get it a little bit, but come on, Pete.
Just for a second, yeah, and then it did work out. But I mean, look, there's a part of fan in me for sure. I mean, I followed this team since I was a boy, so come on now. This is what I know. Let's talk around the league a little bit too, because we'll start with the fact that it looks now like Jacksonville is now saying, "Wait a second, Jalen Ramsey, let's find a way to make this work."
Yeah, I think it's the owner, Shad Khan, stepping in and realizing what the heck are we doing here, and is trying to broker peace. I don't know how you do that. You almost the same thing happened in Oakland with Mike Mayock and Antonio Brown. I mean, once you cross that line, and whether it's a verbal dust up or, God forbid, a physical one with the coach or a general manager, I don't know how you move forward. That's why everyone in this league was assuming Thursday night was it for Jalen Ramsey in Jacksonville. So, I mean, you could argue maybe the Jaguars should say, hey, Doug Marrone, nice knowing you. Tom Coughlin, nice knowing you, because he's that good of a player. And I think Chad Khan is kind of weighing that. He's certainly going to be willing to pay him. So maybe from the player's perspective, if you get that money, you say, you know what, it's not that bad. Florida's nice, no taxes, and they could work things out. But I'll say this: if they do, I don't think Doug Marrone's going to be there next year.
There you go. That's a valid point. John McMullen on with us. We're talking a little NFL football as well as Eagles-Lions tomorrow. And I guess we'll close with this, John. Antonio Brown. You thought maybe you were going to get through an entire segment without me asking you about AB, but I saved it till the end as that news kind of came down last evening. I think it was after Mike was off the Sports Bash, but Antonio Brown no longer a Patriot. And what do you think is the future for one Antonio Brown football-wise, maybe life-wise?
Well, I hope he gets his life together. I think that's more important. I mean, the NFL wasn't going to put him on the commissioner's exempt list for a civil allegation, because that's just a slippery slope that they did not want to go down. So he was going to get through the season if he just put his head down and minded his own business, and then he's going on social media and texting and threatening people. And from that, it's the Patriots' decision more than the NFL. And they said, all right, we're done. So it's a self-inflicted wound. It's hardly the first from his perspective. And I do think he's got to get his life together before you start talking about the NFL. But I will say, and Andrew Brandt says this all the time, greater the talent, longer the leash. That's a top 5 receiver in football. Somebody will give him an opportunity, especially when the injuries start to pile up. The question is, can he keep his nose clean until that happens?